Good morning, Ohana. Glad you tell her. So glad to be here again, and as we get to continue in our study, I'm going to go ahead and pray, and then we'll continue. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for today. I pray that you will continue to be with us, Lord, as we look into your word and just study in the story of Job and that you have for us to learn, not just about him, but about you. And I ask that as we continue to go through this, that the things that are talked about will bring you honor and glory, and that will continue to grow in our relationship with you, help understand you more, and just be able to continue to make you proud and to be the children that live a life that is worthy of the sacrifices that you have made. I thank you so much just for this time that we have to be able to worship you and to be in your house, to be together as one family. Thank you for giving us this opportunity and this privilege, and even the privilege to pray and come to you without any other priest or anything, that we can just come to you at any point in time. And we thank you for that. And just thank you for everything. In your name I pray. Amen. So many moons ago, when I was a teenager, probably 16, 17, somewhere around there was a guy that I was talking to. He was an adult. He was, older man, probably like early 30s or whatever. This was at a church, the home church I grew up in. I was talking to him about the greatness of Michael Jordan. And I was just trying to tell him like the things that Michael Jordan had to go through to be the great Michael Jordan. And as I was talking to him about this, we were just going back and forth. And I was like, yeah, here's the thing. For Jordan to be Jordan, he had to go through legends. He had to go through Larry Bird. He had to go through Magic Johnson. And then he looks at me. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, that history. That's what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? And he looks at me. He says, Michael Jordan never played Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. I said, what? Are you sure? But what are you talking about? He played against them. Bird knocked him out of the playoffs. When he was in his early years, his rookie, sophomore years, like Larry Bird's the one who knocked him out. Actually, his first championship. Jordan's first championship came against the Magic Johnson Lakers. And after that, the Lakers didn't show up until, later to the year 2000s, like when Kobe was around. Jordan had to go through them. Jordan even played with them on the Dream Team. And the guy, dead serious face, just looked at me and said, no, that's not true. That was a different generation. He played them beforehand. Like that, Jordan didn't have to go through them. He didn't have to play against them. And I was like, okay, you guys know I've had anger issues in the past. I never wanted to punch an adult so much in my life. Like I did. I was like, I'm going to take this guy out. I'm going to take this. This guy is ridiculous. How can you not know basic basketball history? Well, the reason why is because this guy actually was a huge football guy. Anything about football at all, like anything you want to talk about, history, stats, current, past, everything, this guy was a guy to go to. I mean, he played football, everything. Like this guy knew what he was talking about when it came to football. But at the same time, because he knew football, he just thought, well, I know all sports. And so really, he didn't have a whole lot of basketball knowledge. Come to find out, he didn't really start following basketball till later in the 90s, which, again, still Jordan was around, but that's all he knows. He didn't really understand much of anything else that happened before that. And so this is something that got me really frustrated because also, many of us, we understand this. I couldn't just sit there and be like, look it up, right? I couldn't say just look it up off the phone. No, we had to say this thing back then where we said, when you go home, look it up. Because everybody had, most people had a computer at home. Go home and look it up. But of course, he never got back to me. It was one of those times where it would have been nice to have a cell phone like we have now to be like, you're wrong, you moron. There it is right there. But he had limited knowledge. He had limited knowledge about basketball. And since he had great knowledge in something else, he thought he had a bunch of knowledge about this, but he didn't. And so he didn't really know what he was talking about. And even though he had this limited knowledge, he still tried to speak on things that he really didn't know what he was speaking on. So because of that, he turned into a sermon illustration. But he struggled, and just like he turned into a sermon illustration because he was trying to talk about things that he didn't really know about. As we continue our study in the book of Job, we're going to look at some people who did the same exact thing, who tried to speak on things that they had limited knowledge on, and we're going to see that the things that they spoke about, that they said, were kind of right, but not really. Now, last week we started with chapter 1, and we really tried to set up the whole book of Job. And there was a lot that we did there. Normally, I like to completely recap to catch everybody up. But like I said, it was a lot. And some of you guys might still be trying to process it. So what I'll say is, if you missed it, check out our YouTube channel, Ohana Church, Kernersville. Sermons on there if you want to check that out. And then if you want to continue to know a little bit more of what we're talking about, in case you don't know, Ohana Church also has a podcast. And so Ohana Church Special Features, it's on Spotify. Or if you go to our YouTube page, little podcast tab, they're uploading on there. And that's where essentially, just so you guys know, it's going to be digging into sermons even deeper, try to explain some things more. We'll have testimonies. We'll talk about doctrine, all a bunch of stuff. And this is all, like, we're doing this for you guys. Like, this isn't something that we're trying to broadcast and trying to grow like Ohana Church. I got to just be honest, that's something we're trying to do. This is for the Ohana congregation, just so we can continue to learn and have more knowledge of things and try to hopefully learn more about Christ and grow in our relationship with him. So those two things are out there if you want to check that out to catch up if you missed out on last week. But last week, I will say this, is when everything just went downhill for Job. He lost everything except for, like I said, his wife and some servants and his own life. Job lost everything. And then now as we go into chapter 2 ups the ante and really starts setting up a good chunk of Job, the next book. And we'll kind of jump around today, but there's things that get worse and there's a whole lot of things that end up happening. So we're going to start to see what that is, how it ups the ante, and then we'll start digging into the main point. So Job chapter 2, starting in verse 1. It says, again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them and presented himself before the Lord. Remember, as we said, Satan, this is Hasatan. This is who we're talking about. It says, the Lord said to him, where do you come from? And then he answered, into the Lord and said, from roaming about on the earth and around it. And the Lord said to him, have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. And he still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to ruin him without cause. And he answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has, he will give for his life. However, put forth your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh. He will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to him, behold, he is in your power, only spare his life. So he went out from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took potsherds to scrape himself while he was sitting among the ashes. So now we have chapter 1, everything that happened. Now we're moving into chapter 2, and this is what we see that is happening. Because now the first chapter, what happened to Job at first, he had great suffering because of loss, because of everything that he had lost. And now he's bringing upon Job, the next set of suffering is suffering through physical pain. So these are the two greatest sufferings that one can have that we see, one from loss, one from pain. Now his argument for doing this is that, he may have remained faithful through the loss, but if a man goes through physical pain, he won't be so faithful. He won't hold fast, as he says, to an integrity, his righteousness. It's not going to happen. Now, I do want to bring something up here as we, before we continue to move on, because this continues to set up as we go through the rest of this book. Because in verse 3, it says, God says, he still holds fast to his integrity, although you incited me against him to ruin him without cause. Now, the reason why I want to stop and talk about this, because this is a huge statement by God. Because like we said last week, yes, like Hasatan, right, the challenger, the adversary, he is the one literally, like physically, he's the one doing this, causing the suffering, causing the pain. He's the one actually acting out upon it. However, God in his statement is still saying that even though he's the challenger, he's the one doing it, God is still ultimately accountable for what is happening to Job. Now, this is something to kind of start to process through, because if we want to say things like God is in control, or God is sovereign. We need to understand that if God is sovereign, then he is accountable for what is happening because he is allowing it. Now, I know this starts getting tough. It starts, especially when we're talking about Job, it starts getting tough because this is where our minds want to start saying things along the lines of, well, how could God allow? How could he do this? If he's so good, why not stop it? And this is something we will continue to unravel as we go through the next couple weeks with Job. But that's something that we need to understand, that God isn't shying away from the fact that he's accountable. That ultimately this is happening, under his purview. Like, this is something that is happening under his watch. And he understands, like I said, we'll continue to unpack this, but I want us to notice something else, because this is what we talked about last week too. Is because last week, and this is how these two things tie together, we talked about the retribution principle, which means righteous people, if you do good, they prosper. If you're wicked and you're sinful and you do things bad, you suffer. And this is the principle that Israel worked on. This is what they worked from. I mean, this is what they thought about God, that this is how things have to be, like to the point where they said, if you are sick, or if your children are sick, it's because of sin. Like, this is the kind of thought process and theology that they had. And a lot of people still think to this day that this is how God works. But what we see here is that God's words, like his exact words, he's showing that he doesn't operate by this principle. Because he's even saying Job is in ruin without cause. God has allowed this, even though Job hasn't done anything to deserve it. Because, and this is huge, because if God actually operated by that principle, if God operated in that manner, he wouldn't have allowed Job to be ruined because of his righteousness. If this is how God really works, if you do good, you will get good. And if you did bad, you will get bad. If that's how he worked for everyone, we wouldn't have this book. This wouldn't have happened. So he's showing that he doesn't operate this way because Job has done nothing wrong, and he hasn't done anything that can even be construed as punishment for wickedness. Like I said, this is something that we are, just the way Job is, we kind of have to break this up. This is things that we have to take in little by little and start adding to everything that we talk about over the next few weeks, because it does all come together. Because what we'll see is that this conversation that God had with the challenger, with Hasatan, this is the last time God will speak in the book of Job until the very end. And then God has plenty to say about everything that has unraveled. So this is where we're at. We see that he comes back. They have this conversation. Hasatan and God have this conversation. And then God's like, go ahead, but you can't kill him. He still must remain alive. Still God showing his sovereignty and control. Like, he is the ultimate God. He still can't go past a certain point. God's still setting that boundary. So Job gets the boils. And we see that it hurts so bad that he uses some glass to try to scratch himself with. He has boils, like I said, from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. They're everywhere. Now, one thing I also want to point out, that not only has Job lost everything, and now he's lost his health. He is now, and there's a statement here that says, sitting out amongst the ashes. Now, what this statement means is that Job is now an outcast. And essentially, because this statement, when you see sitting out amongst the ashes, what it is there is these heaps of ashes outside of where civilization would be, or the city, or wherever he's at. Outside of that, there's all these ashes, because that's where they take all the trash out to burn it. Essentially, Job is sitting in the dump. He has his boils and he's in the dump. He's lost everything. He's lost his health, and he's an outcast hanging out in the dump. That's where Job is at. And it's like, you can't get any lower in life. This is where he is. So now we're going to see what happens next. Now we see Job has lost everything. Now what's going to happen? We're going to be in verse 9. Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. So Job's wife speaks up now. And she speaks up after losing everything herself. I mean, she also lost children. She also lost the housing, the livestock. Like, she's also lost everything. And now her husband's an outcast and has boils from head to toe. He's lost his health. She's lost a lot too. So comes in, she asks Job, do you really still hold on to your integrity? Are you really still going to continue to be righteous? Now, of course, she's hurt. She's angry. And maybe even at this point, beside herself, after everything that's taken place, because she's sitting there, and now she's even turning her anger towards Job, who's still holding on to his integrity. She is angry that Job is still trying to remain righteous even throughout all this loss. This is why she says, just curse God and die. Listen, you've already lost everything. What's the point of living? One might think, why does she tell Job this? Well, because of the thing that we've talked about earlier, right? This retribution principle. They believe in this principle. They believe this is how God works. And for me, like, there's no scholarly nothing. There's no scriptures. This is me just trying to be logical, okay? Like, just logically thinking. I think that she probably sees her husband in the state that he's currently in. He loses everything, and he's still trying to be righteous. Hold on, he's not going to curse God. He's trying not to do that. Again, logically, I think because of her response, she believes maybe Job is hiding some kind of sin that he just won't admit. And then that's why he's being punished for it. So she's like, stop trying to be so holy. Just curse God and die. Like, just stop. Just admit it. You've done something wrong. This is why this is happening. Whatever it is you're holding on to, just admit, this is what I did. Forget it. Let's just die and move on, because life's no longer worth living. Now, the thing that she doesn't realize is that she is now become an agent of the challenger, because if Job listens to her, he would prove the challenger right. That Job is only righteous for the benefits. But listen to Job's response, verse 10. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? And all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So basically, Job comes around again and he just says, whatever God decides to do, I will remain faithful. He doesn't care. Whatever God does, I'm going to remain faithful. If God wants to hand out goodness, or if he wants to hand out adversity, either way, I'm going to accept it. And this is one of those things where we can look at it and say, okay, Job probably is the real deal. He's really faithful, or he's really stubborn. One of the two, right? But it's looking like he's really, really faithful, because he has his right attitude about things. He's truly just thinking, yes, whatever happens, I have to remain faithful. But this temptation to give up, to just curse God and die, or just to not remain righteous as he is, doesn't stop there. Because what happens next, and this takes up a huge chunk of the book of Job. Job is visited by 3 friends that hear about his current situation. And they come to console him, but when they see him, again, out in the city dump with the boils, they can't believe their eyes. They rip their clothes in mourning. They just fall to their face. They're just trying to mourn with him. And what they end up doing is they go and they sit with him, and they don't say a word for 7 days. They just sit with Job for 7 days, no talking. And then after that 7 days, Job actually finally speaks up. And this is a good, the rest of chapter 2. He speaks up, or starts in chapter 3. He speaks up and he starts to lament and he starts to curse the day he was born. He says, I wish I was never born. I wish that maybe I would have died in childbirth, or maybe I should have just died in the womb, or maybe I would have just died from malnutrition because I couldn't feed right. Like, he wishes he was dead. He has all this lament, and he is just like, I just wish this was if this was going to be my end goal, I just wish I wasn't ever here. And he starts this lamenting, and then after he laments and he says all this in front of his friends want to try to comfort him. They want to do the best they can to comfort him and to help him the best that they can. And so what they do is that they start to talk about the way God works and what could be the problem. They're trying to figure out what Job could have done. And they try to tell Job, try to give him advice on how he should react, how he should do different things. And what we'll see is, like the man that I talked about earlier who was talking about Michael Jordan without really knowing anything, we're actually going to see his friends that are a lot in the same boat. Because Job's friends, even though they had good intentions, they really did. They're going to try to speak as though they have this extensive knowledge of God. And we'll see how they can fall up short. So first up of the friends is one named Eliphaz. And listen to, as he's seeing everything that happened to Job, heard Job's lament. This is what he's going to say about Job's suffering. This is going to be Job chapter 4, verse 17. It says, can mankind be just before God? Can a man be pure before his maker? And then 15, he speaks again, chapter 15, verse 14. It says, what is a man that he should be pure? Or he who is born of a woman that he should be righteous? See, Eliphaz's proposed solution for him, that for Job to understand, is that no mortal is righteous. No one is. Not a single person is righteous. Now, technically, Eliphaz is right. And we know, we even say, right, all have sinned, all have fallen short of the glory of God. We understand no one is truly righteous. Other than Jesus, there's no one who's ever lived that has lived without sin. So his claim about no one is righteous, he's kind of on track here. However, his point for saying this is where he starts to lose it a little bit. See, Eliphaz will take his solution and offer advice on Job on how he can fix his suffering. And this is what he says, Job chapter 5. And he says this a couple times. I said, this is a big conversation between the three of them. They jump around. They're all trying to talk. So this is why we're jumping around a bit. Verse 8. It says, but as for me, I would seek God, and I would place my cause before God. And then it's chapter 5, still verse 17. Behold, how happy is the man whom God reproves. So do not despise the discipline of the Almighty, for he inflicts pain and gives relief. He wounds, and his hands also heal. From 6 troubles he will deliver you, and even in 7 evil will not touch you. So the first thing he's saying, since no one is righteous, right? He's still kind of making this argument like his wife, like, listen, must have done something. No one's righteous. There is some sin here. And since that is the case, you need to appeal to God. You need to go to him, grovel at his feet, appeal to him, ask him to restore you back. Admit whatever it is that you've done wrong and ask him to restore you. And he says, after you make this appeal and you remove all wickedness from your life, this is what you need to do. Verse 22, in chapter 22, starting in verse 21, this is what he says. He says, yield now and be at peace with him. Thereby goodwill will come to you. Please receive instruction from his mouth and establish his words in your heart. If you return to the Almighty, you will be restored. If you remove unrighteousness far from your tent. Again, he's making this claim that if Job is to appeal to God and remove all wickedness, right? Remove all sin from his life, then he will be restored. It is kind of ironic, though, that he just told him no one is righteous, but you have to remove all wickedness. Kind of shows he's trying to figure it out, but doesn't really have a good grasp on it. But this is what he's saying. He's like, if you do this, you will be restored back. And the thing is, if you look at the beginning of chapter 22, if you go and you read through everything Eliphaz has to say, he actually goes on to say that Job's wickedness is great. And he actually starts listing things that Job probably did. He's kind of fishing here to try to get Job to be like, okay, yeah, that's what I did. But he's trying to get it out of him because he's saying no one is righteous. Therefore, there has to be something wrong that you did. So this whole thing of holding on to your integrity, holding on to your righteousness, man, that's a facade. You can't do that. You just got to admit everything that you did wrong. So since no one is righteous, then you must have done something to anger God. And this is what Eliphaz does. And this is the point in the direction that he's coming from in his conversation throughout the book of Job. Next up, we have another friend named Bildad. And this is what he has to say in Job chapter 8, starting in verse 8. Please inquire of past generations and consider the things searched out by the fathers. For we are only of yesterday and know nothing, because our days on earth are as a shadow. And then he speaks again in chapter 25, verse 4. How then can a man be just with God? Or how can he be clean who is born of a woman? So Bildad's solutions are, listen, man, we know nothing and no one can be righteous. Like, there's just no way. So we have Eliphaz who says no one is righteous. Bildad's like, no one can be. Like, even trying to be is a joke. So no one can be. And let's just be real. We're too young to really know anything. We don't really know and understand what God does and what he's going to do. Like, we just can't know anything. It's impossible for us. So he says, when he looks like, look at our past generation, right? Look to your elders. See what they have to say. I'm surely they can teach you and show you what you've done wrong, show you what you need to do to change. Surely this is what we need to do, because we really don't know much. And so Bildad is really trying to get Job to search his heart and find out what he has done that he can't see. Like, this is kind of that moment like, hey, man, you got to take your blinders off. Or we got to figure out what it is that's blinding you to where you think you have to stay so righteous. And so he suggests that he needs to seek this counsel, and that maybe this counsel will help him realize that humans can't be. Like, we just can't. It's impossible. And then maybe at that point, Job's eyes will be open and he'll finally begin to process what he has done, and then he can admit it, and then he can have his process of restoration. This is why he continues chapter 8, verse 5. This is what he says he just really needs to do. If you would seek God and implore the compassion of the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, surely now he would rouse himself for you and restore your righteous estate. See, Bildad's advice to Job is to plead his righteousness. Even though no one can, let's just go ahead and make this list of all the things you've done right. And maybe if you take that list and go to God and say, God, look at everything that I have done. Look at everything I've done for you. Look at everything I have just done that is right in your eyes. Like, yes, I have wickedness, but that's nothing compared to everything I have done. And maybe if you do that, then God will see it. And he'll say, yeah, you know what? You're right. Your good outweighs the bad, so I'll restore everything to you. That is what he suggests that Job needs to do. That is the second friend. Then we have the third friend. His name is Zophar. And this is what he's going to bring to the table. Job chapter 11, starting in verse 7. Can you discover the depths of God? Can you discover the limits of the Almighty? They are high as the heavens. What can you do? Deeper than Sheol. What can you know? Its measure is longer than the earth and broader than the sea. What he brings to the table, Zophar says, God is just unknowable, man. That we can't. You want to start processing this? That we got nothing. No one's got anything. No one can know anything about God. He is way too big. He's just way too awesome. Whatever. Like, there's just no way anyone can know anything about it. Like this, like trying to figure out God is an impossible task. This is we are but dust in the wind kind of mentality, right? Like there's just nothing we can do. So since there's nothing we can do, this is what his advice is to Job, still in chapter 11, verse 13. If you would direct your heart right and spread out your hand to him, if iniquity is in your hand, put it far away, and do not let wickedness dwell in your tents. Then indeed you could lift up your face without moral defect, and you would be steadfast and not fear. For you would forget your trouble as waters that have passed by, and you would remember it. Your life would be brighter than noonday. Darkness will be like the morning. Then you would trust because there is hope, and you would look around and rest securely. You would lie down and none would disturb you, and many would entreat your favor. So far, essentially what he's saying, he's like, listen, God is just completely unknowable. Since we can't figure out God, he's completely unknowable. There's nothing that we can do to figure out why or whatever he does. We just can't. Really, your only option is to completely devote your heart to doing things that are right. Just focus on that. Just focus on being the goodest, bestest person that you can be. I know I make up words. You guys should be used to that by now. But that's what you need to do. Do everything you can. Devote yourself to that. Focus on doing what is right. And then hopefully God will see it and then restore you. That's his advice. Now, I know we've jumped around a bit in the book. We're trying to see everything that these friends have said. We want to see this conversation. But these solutions offered and advice given isn't necessarily the best. Now, you may be thinking, but some of this sounds right. But you know what happens in between these conversations? Job actually pushes back. He pushes back against what they're saying, and he tries to show them that, listen, your conclusions are wrong. I mean, you're missing a big component here. They're making these big assumptions about Job's situation, but they don't really see the full picture. Because here's the thing, when we look at their advice, here's why they're missing it. Because they are talking from the assumption that Job is guilty. You know, they're looking at this from a standpoint that Job is the one on trial here, and that he has been found guilty, and Job's suffering is evidence of that verdict. And that's why he suffers. This is why this has been passed down. So his friends are they're trying to act like a jury, but instead of deciding whether he's guilty or not, they've already decided he's guilty. They've assumed it. And what they're doing is they're now looking for evidence to prove that verdict that they believe he has. This is why they're offering this up. Like, yes, you must have done something wrong. No one is righteous. No one can be righteous. Devote your heart to God, to doing what's right. That's what you have to do. See, they are throwing out these ideas and reasons of what's happening. And this is really what happened. I mentioned this last week. This is what happens even to us when we go through these hard times, right? Sometimes we may think, oh, well, I've done something wrong. Maybe I've angered God. This is why we're suffering. Of course, the problem with this mentality and this automatic assumption of a guilty verdict is that there are times where, like Job, no sin has been committed. No wrong has been done. There isn't something that we can point to and say, oh, yeah, that's why I'm suffering. I made that bad decision. Or I was pretty stupid. I reacted. That sometimes we got nothing. Sometimes we have done everything we can to live according to God's laws, to live like Jesus. We're doing everything. And yes, we all know we've all messed up from time to time. But then when we mess up, we pray, we ask for forgiveness. God forgives us, and we continue to move forward. But yet there's still that suffering. We start to think like, what? Because there's not always that thing that we can point to. You know, because even when the stuff that Job's friend says, to an extent they're right. Right? Like there's this idea that no one is righteous. Okay, yes, we know nothing compared to God, right? Compared to God, there's not much we know. And yes, there's no way we can know everything about God. Not on this side of heaven anyways. And honestly, it's actually pretty good advice for us to search our heart and to take off our blinders, remove sin from our lives, devote ourselves to God and to his law and to living like Jesus. Yes, that's actually great advice. But there's two big problems with this advice, especially in Job's story. One, Job has done nothing wrong. And two, their advice was not so that Job can restore his relationship with God, but instead so that he can have his possessions and health restored. That was the point of their advice. So not only are they starting from false assumptions, this isn't about Job getting right with God. When we talk about putting sin away and getting focused, getting back on track, rededicating, whatever, it's about getting our relationship right with God. That's not the advice here. They want Job to do all these things so he can have all his stuff back, have his health back. That's what their advice is. And see even the parts of this story where humans are trying to figure things out, we see what the real trial is. It really is a lot more philosophical. See, because the challenger is trying to prove that God's way of doing things is misguided. Because of the way he's done things, because of the test subject of Job, he's saying that humans had the wrong idea about God and about how he works. Because it actually looks like he may be right, at least about humanity, because of Job's wife telling Job that without the benefits of righteousness, it's not worth living. So just curse God and die. Or Job's friends trying to tell Job, like, hey, there's some wrong that you did. And so you got to get it out of your life. And then if you do, then you'll get your possessions back. So it looks like the challenger may actually have a point here, that humans got it wrong on about God and how he works. It looks like he may be right that, especially seeing these four people and the advice that they offered, that humanity only sees righteousness as a means to an end. But the good news is, this is the book of Job. This isn't about them. This is about Job. And this is why God presents Job as righteous. You know, he's not presenting his wife. He's not presenting his friends as the one who's righteous and amazing. Like, he's presenting Job. And that says something. And this helps us even understand like what Job's going through, but also who God is. Because, you know, like I said earlier, Job fought back against his wife and friends throughout this book, telling them they have it all wrong, that their conclusions are all wrong, and that just because God has allowed him to be ruined doesn't mean he did anything wrong. Like, we're starting to unravel a little bit who God is, how he works. And so Job, he even declares that God can do whatever he wants. And who is he to even try to figure out what God is doing? See, Job wants to keep his position of righteousness, integrity, even though everyone around him is telling him otherwise. Telling him to just forget it, just die, or say do it, just so you can get everything back. Unfortunately, Job's wife and his friends, again, becomes agents of the challenger because they are starting from the assumption that benefits are essential to the equation of righteousness. See, they think that Job's wife and his friends believe that prosperity must follow righteousness. If there is no prosperity, then there is no reason for righteousness. This is where they're coming from. And what's crazy is this is where a lot of people still come from today. They believe that if I don't get the benefits of following God, of doing what is right, then there's no point in following God. Because they believe in this retribution principle, because they believe, well, if God is just, then if I do things right, then I should get good things. So this is why this advice, this life lesson that Job gets from his wife and his friends, you know, if he gives in, the challenger wins. The challenger wins the case. And he shows God that, yes, the way you're doing things is wrong, because you know what? Job is only righteous because God blesses him. Not because they want to love and honor God with their lives. No, he's only doing this for the benefits. And if we aren't careful, we can fall into the same way of thinking. You know, because we do. Like, we would like to think that good things will happen to us if we do good things, and vice versa. But I hate to break it to everyone here. You might get mad at me. Karma's not real. That's not how God works. There's no such thing as karma. And we know this because of like what we talked about earlier today, where God said, he has done nothing. You incited me to ruin with no cause. This isn't how God works. But this is exactly what the challenger is trying to prove, that we as humans believe and want to act as if this idea of karma is real. Because if true, then we only act based on personal benefit and nothing more. It won't go any deeper than that. So we think for God to get to be just, we must prosper. Good must prosper, wicked must suffer. And this human level of thinking is why Job gets bad advice. Even though it sounds good, even though they're not completely off in some things, it ends up being bad advice because they would have led him down a path that was not the right path. So we must all, as we look at this and we see their advice, they needed to reevaluate their thinking. We need to reevaluate our thinking about how and why God works and what he allows and what he does. Because if not, we'll be in the same boat as Job, his wife and friends. Well, we will start to think as well, okay, well, I'm going to I'm going to go to church. I'm going to pray. I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to make sure that I'm serving. I'm going to make sure that I'm being nice to people. And everyone I come in contact with, I'm going to be so nice to them. But not because we truly love God. Not because we want to build his kingdom. Not because we want more people to know the Savior that we have. But because we just want to make sure God leaves us alone and blesses us and we have everything that we want and that we're comfortable. This is why we must reevaluate our thinking about God, because this isn't how he works. So as the band comes up, I just want to leave us with one final question as we're talking about all this and just this way of thinking. And I know this gets hard. I'll get to the question in a second, but I know this gets hard. Because like I said last week, it's easy to say, when I'm going through stuff, let's look at the book of Job to help me get through the stuff. But the thing is, this is a story about God, about how he works, how he does things. This story is meant not just to help us. Once we finish and hopefully we understand the book of Job better, it will help us through our suffering. But ultimately, hopefully, it will help us with our relationship with God because we'll have a better understanding of our God. So the question I want to leave us with is, are we doing what is right for the benefits or just for our relationship with God?